I don't talk about myself a lot. I try to keep everything that I do centered and focused on God. That is the most important thing that I can do. But I know that you have some questions. I know that my testimony is powerful. God gave it to me for a big reason, and it's going to be to inspire people. It's going to be so that you can see the darkness that He pulled me from. And so today, I'm going to be vulnerable and tell you my testimony. And no better person to tell you that with than my other half, my husband, Walt Gabbard. He is usually in the background because he's the man behind the lens. He's behind the cameras. He's the one capturing these beautiful moments of people coming out of the water so that we can put them together and show the world how Jesus is changing lives. And so today he's going to join us on this podcast to talk about our testimony, about the things that I've been through, how I got through them, and how I got to where I am today. This might have to be a 2-part series because my story is very long, and I'm going to try to keep it short. I will try to cut some parts out, but I want you to know the main stuff. I want you to know what I've been through, what made me who I am today, and how God gets the glory of my story. So welcome in my husband, Walt Gabbard, as he be's vulnerable too, because he doesn't like the camera. He's always behind it. He doesn't like to be in front of it. But he has agreed to sit down and tell you what we've been through. So I hope you enjoy this episode of In the Water podcast with my husband and I. This might be the most vulnerable podcast I ever do, and it's because it is with my husband.
Hello.
This is Walt Gabbard. He is the man behind the scenes. A lot of times we keep our private life private and out of the public's eye, but there's a lot of things y'all have been asking, and I feel like it's time to tell. I want to start with the lighter stuff.
We're going light. Okay.
I'm going to start with how we met first.
I filmed a lot of hunts, and I was going to Manitoba, Canada, Snowflake, Manitoba. And I found out there was going to be a girl in camp. I looked her up, saw her, and I was kind of done. And reached out to her. We started talking. I showed up, got out of the truck. We drove 20-something hours, and she was already there. I said, "Hello, darling." And then she fell in love with me, and the rest is history.
The history, though. The history is what everybody's been waiting for. I've told a little bit of my testimony, but I've not really went in depth because I do try to focus on only God. I try to let people see Jesus through me and not really me as a person. And so this is very vulnerable of me, but I feel like there's a lot I do want people to know.
Yep. They need to know. It's one of the most inspiring stories I've ever heard, and I lived it. And I think everybody else needs to hear it too.
Well, then here we go.
All right.
So after we met, we knew we would be married.
Yep.
He lived in Ohio, and I was from North Carolina originally. He worked for Zinc Calls and Avionics.
And let me make it clear, I'm from Kentucky. I'm not from Ohio. Go ahead. I just had to get that out there. No offense to the Ohio folks. I love them.
I'll have offense to Ohio. It's cold.
It is cold up on Lake Erie.
We lived there for 4 years, and I vividly remember crying to pump my gas one time when I was pregnant. It's cold up there.
Brutal.
So anyways, we lived in Ohio for 4 years. We had 2 children there.
Mm-hmm.
But to back up just a minute, how I started getting sick.
It happened in Snowflake, Manitoba.
It happened as soon as I met you.
I know.
And for a long time, I wondered if it was a punishment, like you finally find the person that was created for you, and then you're sicker than you've ever been your whole life. We were mid-hunt camp, and we had went to eat chicken, and we had been living off of junk food. Because, in hunting camps, like you're scavengers. You just eat whatever you can.
And there's like no stores up there in Canada.
None. And so we were just eating whatever we had while we were on our hunts. And for me, that wasn't hardly anything. I just didn't eat. And we finally, like day 3 or 4, we were moving locations. And so we found this chicken place.
I remember it.
And we ate the chicken place and got back to the camp. And like 2 o'clock in the morning, I woke up vomiting. And it was so bad I was passing out in between the times I was vomiting, and Walt's a really hard sleeper, so he did not wake up. But we also had other guys in the camp. Fred Zink kind of went in panic mode because it was brutal. I was throwing up and I was passing out, and so he called the ambulance. And the ambulance got there, and we were in the middle of nowhere, so they took me 2 hours away, and there I was by myself in the hospital. I was there overnight, and then y'all went hunting
Yep.
because the show must go on, which I understand, but y'all went hunting, and I remember thinking, man, this was just food poisoning. Like, it was something just so bizarre. But the hospital there in Canada treated me like dirt. They told me that basically I need to go back to my own country and they would treat me there. And they told me they thought it was gallbladder. And so now let's fast forward a little bit. I didn't get sick again for months. We ended up having our son. And during the time of my pregnancy, I was in the hospital every other week. Now, it was just
It was constant.
brutal. It was everything I ate. I was so sick. It wasn't just sickness though, it was pain. There was so much stomach pain. I would just cry and cry. I was miserable. And
That was 2012.
every time they would diagnose me with either food poisoning, or they would say after I had the baby I would need to have my gallbladder removed. So that was the two things they kept telling us over and over and over. And so we did. We had Boone. And then in between the time we had Boone and Waylon, which is our two sons' names, in between the time we had our sons, we were in the hospital constantly. Every other week, just always in the hospital. We went to 11 GI specialists, which it takes months to get in with one. Well, we went to 11. And I would have so much hope. I would just be hopeful for this doctor to save my life and to help me because my life was miserable throwing up all the time.
We had a lot of faith in doctors back then.
A lot.
Until we got into it. And it was after Wayland 2015 is when we really started hitting all the different GIs. So it was like 2011 to 2015. It was just kind of rough. After we had Wayland, that's when we moved back to Kentucky.
They decided here in Kentucky that they were like, yep, it's your gallbladder. They did a HIDA scan, took that thing out, and as soon as they did, it messed up my entire bile system.
Which, come to find out, if you have any kind of stomach problems, they're going to take your gallbladder out.
It's pretty much a checklist. They're like, oh, well, gallbladder.
Stomach problems, let's cut that gallbladder out.
IBS, it's a list, and that's what we realized after seeing so many GIs. It was a checklist they were going through, which I understand. I get it. You know, the stomach is only so many parts. Like, they're trying to figure out what was wrong. But it was not my gallbladder, and as soon as they took it out, my pancreas started acting up, bile ducts closed up, had to have 3 surgeries after that, cutting back into it, putting stents in my pancreas.
Sphincter of Odie.
It was miserable. Being a new mom, I breastfed.
It was brutal.
I took care of my kids, and it really was. You had to work yourself to the bone all the time.
And little did we know we wasn't even close to the bottom yet.
2019 was the worst year of our entire lives. It was terrible. There was so much pain, darkness. At this point, we had been going to church, but we only went to church every now and then. Like, it was never, our faith was not strong. No. We were not even close to knowing. Yeah, no, not even close. Both of us were raised in church, but we still didn't know Jesus.
No.
We just knew of him. And so at this point, we were just hanging on by a thread, just going to these doctors and putting all of our faith in them. Because we didn't have faith in God that much at the time.
Yep.
We were putting it in doctors and people that we thought could help us. And so 2019 came, and I had enough.
2019 came, and you started losing weight like crazy. Yep. And we were still going to doctors. We were searching them out all the time. Yep. Trying to find somebody that knew what was going on. And you just kept losing weight. But we ended up looking for doctors to find out what was going on because you were just miserable all the time. And we found that woman doctor.
She thought for sure it was endometriosis. She went in and she told me that there was a possibility that when I wake up, I wouldn't be able to have kids again. And I had to consent to it. But I remember having a little hope because I did want like 4 kids. I wanted more kids. And so I had a little hope that she wouldn't find that and it wouldn't be that problem. Because at this point, everything else wasn't the problem. So I figured this wouldn't be either. And so she goes in there and she ended up having to do a D&C. And
endometrial ablation.
So she burnt the whole uterus.
Mm-hmm.
And then I woke up and I just remember asking that question, like, can I still have kids, you know? And she said no.
Mm-hmm.
And I just remember feeling like gut punched, because it's one thing if you make the decision to go get your tubes tied or you make the decision to have it, but it's another thing for them to think that that's what's going to fix you.
And then it doesn't.
And then it doesn't. It actually almost killed me.
It did.
Then I ended up having endometriitis. So endometriitis was the infection of the endometrial liner. So the places that she burned, I got an infection in there. So they put me in Baptist Health Hospital for 7 days. And while I was in there, they put me on 4 different antibiotics. And during the course of all the antibiotics trying to help the endometriitis, I got C. diff. And then I was so sick, I was like, it was beyond words. And at this point, I was already so tiny, I was already so skinny, but I dropped like all of the weight that I had. I was 100 pounds. After that, it was just death mode. It was just death mode. I got transferred to UK hospital, and when I got to UK, we had the worst doctor ever. Remember that lady? She was
really
terrible. But they did find the problem. And when they found out I had something called SMAS, it was a vascular compression where the superior mesenteric artery crosses over the duodenum and compresses it. So basically it was clamping down on my intestine and I couldn't digest food. So then when food would go in my digestive system, it would come out both ways just in reaction to not being able to digest.
But they acted like it couldn't do that.
Yep.
They're like, this is not a problem. This is not your problem. This is not why you're dealing with this.
They had never really seen it. Like that doctor had said she had never seen a case and that it wasn't real. And we were literally looking at the scan where the compression was, and she was like, it's still not going to cause that amount of pain. It's still not causing your main problem. And we're like, yeah, it is. So we ended up having to move to my mom's house for a couple months. And she lived in North Carolina. That's where I was raised.
I had to keep working, you know.
You did.
Because all this was going on, and I had to make sure we had insurance, paying the bills, and then we just couldn't do it at our home here in Kentucky. It wasn't possible because I couldn't leave. Because I had to travel a lot for work, and I couldn't leave.
Because we had the kids to take care of.
Because I had the kids to take care of. And at that point, you couldn't take care of both kids without help.
No, I couldn't even eat a goldfish cracker. I was miserable. And so we were going to move to my mom's and just stay with her until basically I died.
It got to the point every time I'd go on a trip, I'd be waiting for a phone call. Something that I had to jet out of there for, you know.
I'm sorry.
Don't be sorry.
As we were going to North Carolina, the last hospital we were in, the UK hospital, they gave me a feeding tube. And it was like the last resort. Like, here, try to gain some weight. And the feeding tubes kept failing. And it was never the clogging of the tube. It was the vascular compression that was literally clamping the tube. Nothing was getting through, not even a tube. And so I kept trying the tubes. And I would go to the hospital, wait in the ER for hours upon hours, get another feeding tube shoved down my nose, and it was an NJ tube, so it goes farther into your intestine, and everything was just miserable. My life was literally hell. And I remember in the hospital just feeling like I was in a pit of darkness. There was no happiness in life. It was misery. It was actual hell.
There was no light there. The only time you had light was around the kids, and you would muster up this mom strength and be happy and make sure we did fun things. But the reality was, we were sitting at your mom's house, and you literally looked at me and told me that you wasn't dying fast enough and you wanted me to do something about it. And that's when I'd kind of had enough. And I said, we're going to have to find out what this is and try to fix it. Because you gave up.
I was asking
done.
You to kill me.
I know.
I could not handle it no more. I had been in pain for 8 years at that time, and I couldn't do it no more. I fought for our kids, and I fought for you, and I tried to stay alive, and then it was like, I can't live anymore. I can't go through this pain every day. Nothing ever got better. All the hope had been squashed, and that was it.
It was a terrible time because you felt like you were more of a burden to us than anything. You said that a lot. But that's when I took to the internet and started looking for answers. Like, these doctors are not doing it. So many doctors, these feeding tubes, these people are doing nothing.
Mm-mm.
And I started looking up the symptoms, and I ran across the Facebook group, SMAS. And it's like, you start scrolling on it, it's like all these young women with this same thing.
There's a few men, but
Few
it's
men,
mainly
but
women.
it was 99% women on there. And they had the same symptoms, the same problems,
Yeah.
feeding tubes, and there
And they
was
were dying.
1 out of 3.
Yep.
And there was one name kept coming up. It was Dr. Marone in Baltimore, Maryland.
Yep.
And I remember we had to get a referral to him because
Yep.
I told you about him. Like, babe, this is it. Like, this guy's fixing people with this. And I had to call your other doctor, and she didn't want to refer. And I'm like, listen,
This is our last chance. Like, this is it.
at this point, we're not asking you for a referral. Like,
Mm-hmm.
we're doing this, you know?
She didn't give us a referral. She kept telling us no.
It was wild.
And that's the devil himself, like literally stopping us from going to get better care.
It was crazy.
And so you called Dr. Marone's office, and we went without a referral. You called them and told them our story, and an angel must have been on the other end of that phone because they relayed the message right to Dr. Marone. And I remember it was 2 weeks from that point. I remember my mom pulling my feeding tube. I was like, I'm done. I'll go have the surgery. She pulled my feeding tube, which was terrible. And we got in a car and we drove to Maryland.
Baltimore, Maryland.
And Johns Hopkins.
And quick point, on the way to Baltimore, Maryland, we pulled off to have dinner with these people that we didn't know. That was the Greeleys.
Yeah.
Who Chaz has been helping you in the water a lot.
Yep.
You baptized them a year ago. They now live in Kentucky and moved from Maryland here.
Mm-hmm.
They're our best friends here.
Yep.
You know.
Nothing's coincidence.
But anyway, we had to go to, and we met them.
Yep.
And had dinner with them, and they were just very kind and let us stay with them during this whole process.
And they had kids, so all this time of all the hospital visits I'd ever went to, I always tried to find fun for the kids. I didn't want them to literally just see their mom dying. That is the worst, for people to just look and watch me physically deteriorate in front of them is what they were going through. And they had so much love and just hope, and they just see me as their mom, but really I was a shell of a person. So I would try to find, fun for them wherever we went. And so the Greeleys really helped their kids, got to play with our kids, and they wasn't thinking about mom in the hospital.
Mm-hmm.
And so we get to Johns Hopkins, and we meet Dr. Marone, and
first question he asked, how many doctors you been to before me?
Yep. And he did surgery. He told us before surgery, he said, this might not work. She's really tiny, and she's had this problem for so long now. We're kind of taking a chance on it. But he was also very confident. And I could see the confidence in his face.
He had done it once or twice. He'd done it more than anybody else in the country.
Yeah. And he said, it's going to be about a 10-hour surgery, and you're going to have a big road of recovery. And I said, okay, this is my only choice. And before that surgery, I made a video for y'all.
Mm-hmm.
And it was basically just saying that I loved everybody and teaching you how to take care of the boys and show them extra love. It was good. It was a heart-wrenching video, but I just wanted them to remember me. And I guess I just had no hope. I had no hope. Mm-hmm. I didn't want to live anymore. I was honestly probably more hopeful to not make it out of surgery. And I do remember being put to sleep and thinking, man, I hope I don't wake up. But I did.
Mm-hmm.
I did. And then, and then I woke up. I was still alive. I had, just like the doctor said, a rough road to recovery, learning to eat again.
Couldn't eat solid foods for a long time.
I had been diagnosed with gastroparesis, so my body literally couldn't digest food. And I was on soups and just a grueling process of learning food again. But I did it. And I gained strength. And I gained life back. And then we came home here to Kentucky. We thought we was going to have to sell our house and move to North Carolina.
I'll never forget the day you came downstairs recovering or whatever, and you were starting to feel better. And we put our house up for sale.
One day.
That
was it. It was on the market one day.
And you came down and you're like, we're not selling our house, we're going back home.
Yep.
And that was
the best day of your life.
It was like the start of getting our life,
It was.
It was just that next move to get our life back.
It was. And we did.
And then much more happened.
So we come home, and as we're home, we find this church. We had been at this church before. We had been kind of, I don't know how to explain it to a lot of people because a lot of people are still in this part of their lives where they just sit in the pew. It's just church folks where they go. It's a routine. It's just you go to church and you feel a little better about yourself because you went, and that's it. You don't
God's
really
been showing us a lot of that lately.
And so we were those people. We just dressed up and we went to church, and we would get a little nugget here and there. We would hear the preacher and it would hit us a little bit, but it was nothing like it should have been, our relationship with Jesus. While I was in the hospital having surgery, there was a girl, and this is the most redneck story, and I've told a few people this, but it's so hillbilly and redneck, I don't even like to tell it. But while I was in the hospital, this girl who had been to our house before, just a few times, I wasn't close friends with her, but I still knew her. She knew me. We had each other's phone numbers. She come to my house and stole our dog. He's a bloodhound. Well, actually, he just passed away like 6 months ago, but we had him for a very long time. We had him, Duke. We had him at this point for 4 years, something like that, and we rescued him. He was thrown out at a landfill, spent like $1,000 to get him wormed because he was so sick, and he was a part of our family. But while we were gone, we knew that we couldn't take him with us. He was already recovering from so much stuff that he had going on himself, and he loved his home. He was a porch dog, hound dog. He loved his porch, and he knew his radius and his boundaries of where we lived. And so we decided when we went to North Carolina we wouldn't take him because it would be awful. And first of all, you can't take dogs to the hospital. And so we decided, we wouldn't take him until we had to, until we actually were moving. At this point, we were not moving. We had everything still in our home. The only thing we had in North Carolina was suitcases. And so we left everything here, and we had 2 people checking on the dog. We had our neighbor every day, and then your mom would come and just love on him. And so he was being well taken care of, but this girl took it upon herself to have gossip in the church, and it was actually the preacher's wife who was in on the gossip too. And they all gossiped about me abandoning my dog. And I had never said anything of the sorts. I had never implied anything like that, but their gossip turned into the associate pastor coming to our house and stealing our dog. Literally stealing him.
It really never made any sense.
No, because we live so far away.
And you could just text them and do you need me to take care of your dog or do you need me to keep your dog? But it was just took her dog, and then you showed up here and Duke was gone. It was a complete panic mode.
Gotta go back to the story of it. After she took the dog, I didn't know that she had taken him. I just knew he was gone. So our neighbor found the very same day she had took him, it was within hours that we knew because they had come over to check on him. He wasn't here, and he's never not here. And so they called me and they said, Kayla, your dog's not here. Duke's not here. We don't know where he is. So I'm like, well, just call for him and, try to go look for him and let me know in a couple hours. And dark came and still no Duke. And I'm like, oh no. And my first thought was he ran away. He ran away from home. And I was so heartbroken. And I cried and I cried. And I had a feeding tube at that point. I had a feeding tube. This was right before we went in for surgery. I had a feeding tube. And my mom pulled that feeding tube out. And we drove 6 hours back here to Kentucky for me to look for my dog. I was dying, but my dog was that important. And I came back here. I remember getting in the shower after looking all day. We had looked all day for Duke. All day. We had so many people here looking for Duke. We were hollering everywhere. And my last resort was well, I'll post on Facebook. Isn't it funny? Facebook's been 2 times saving our lives with things.
I know, right?
And you hate social media.
I do.
So anyways, I posted on social media and I posted a picture of him and asked if anybody had seen him in the area. And I get out of the shower and I got a phone call from that girl. I answered the phone and she said, I got your dog. And I said, at first I was relieved. I was like, oh, good. And I was like, wait a minute. How did he get where you live? I knew she lived a town over. She said, oh, I came and got him. I'm like, you came and got my dog? She's like, yep. I'm like, you stole my dog? It was a moment of not even being able to process what happened. Who does that? And so she wouldn't bring him back to me. She said, you can come get him. And gave me her address. And my mom was with me at the time, and I was shaking. I was mad. I was not holy yet. And I was about to go and get that girl.
You
I
used to
was about
have
to
a
channel my Rose Nama Eunice and go get her.
you used to have a little bit of a
Yep.
wasn't real great with unforgiveness.
No,
If somebody
no.
wronged you, it was kind
Mm-hmm.
of a
Yeah.
mark them off, and
Yep.
that was it.
That's absolutely how I felt.
Yep.
That's how I was with so many people. If they
Hmm.
wronged me, it was just, I don't need you. But this girl, I get there and Duke comes running out of her house, jumps right in the car, and she's in a robe, and her little kid is out there with her, little baby, like 2 years old probably, right there at her robe, and she's shaking, and she goes to touch me, and she's like, "I'm so sorry," and I'm like, "Don't touch me," like this was before. I'm like, "Don't touch me," and then I don't know what else I said, but I got back in my car and I drove home, and the whole time I just couldn't comprehend it. It made no sense to me. So now we'll get back to the story of us coming home from the hospital. We're home, we're recovering, everything's going smoothly, and we decide that it's time to go back to church. We need to get back in church. We want our kids raised in church, and we're deciding on where to go. So we start floating around to churches. We went to so many churches, and each time they weren't right. It wasn't a fit. I didn't get anything from the message, and it just wasn't right. And so each church we would go to, we would try it for months, and then we'd go somewhere else. And so we were at the point of trying another church, and we were at that stop sign at the end of our road, and we could take a right to go to town to go to all these other churches. Or one of the only churches on the left was the old church. And I remember sitting at that stop sign and looking at you and saying, I have really understood the message when this preacher preached. I understood it. And I want to go back there. And you were like, I've been wanting to go back.
Good preacher.
He was. So we went back to the church. And when we did, I don't remember what he preached on now. But whatever he preached on, I felt the need to give it all to God. I felt the need that God saved my life. And he saved me for a purpose. And it wasn't just to live idly, just live a little bit. It was for a reason. So then after that service, I went to the altar. And when I was at the altar, I prayed to God. And I never really heard him, never really truly felt God before. I knew he was there. I just had a disconnect that I can't explain. It was like I just had never been plugged in. I knew he was there somewhere. So I just prayed that. I said, God, I don't hear you, I don't see you, but I know you're there. I know you saved me. I know I have a purpose. Why can't I feel something more than I feel? Why don't I still want to live? You saved my life. You got me out of this darkness I was in. But I still feel like I'm in darkness. I still feel like I'm not all the way in the light. And I prayed at that altar. And when I stood up, I heard the word forgiveness. And I had no idea what he meant. But I heard forgiveness. And I turned around. And she was standing in the aisle between me and the door. And I spun around and I looked right at her and I looked her right in the eye. And I said, I forgive you. And for the first time in my life, I meant it. I never forgave people before. I held grudges. But I looked right at her in the eye and I truly forgave her. I didn't even care what her reasoning was anymore. I just forgave her. I just saw her as a person that made a huge, huge mistake. And I hugged her. And when I hugged her, she started crying and she was saying things like, I've never stolen anything in my life. I don't know why I did this. And in those moments, God showed me, it was just like a flood. God showed me that it wasn't even her. That I was being attacked. That I had been being attacked for so long. That she was just part of the attack. She was a part of a plan to tear me apart. She was just a small part of that plan to just break me. And when I saw that and I realized spiritual warfare is real. This girl is not a terrible person. She just let herself be used by the devil. And when I realized that and I truly forgave her, forgiveness is so hard when people wrong you. But in that moment, and I let it go, I got closer to God instantly. And when I got home, I opened the Bible. I still have it. This is my favorite Bible. It's the one I actually teach from. It was the first Bible I ever read. And I had gotten it a long time ago when I worked at Great Clips. And there was a Christian store beside of the hair salon. And God had guided me there one day without me knowing why. And I had a Bible and my name engraved on it. And I never read it. I would try and I would put it away and I would try. But somehow that Bible made it here to our new house. And after that sermon, I picked it up. and I started reading. I started going through sanctification where I would read and I would learn and God would change me. I would read. It was a repeat process. I would read, I would learn, and I would change. And whatever it was, I was never prideful on it. I knew that God knew better than me and that whatever it was, He was right because He told me to forgive and I forgave and it got me closer to Him. So I was just hungry to get closer. How do I get closer? And that process meant giving up things. Whatever it was of the world that had pulled me in and that had me in chains, just giving up so many things. And I changed it all. I changed the way I dressed. I used to dress so provocatively, which I'm actually very shameful of now. I see pictures of myself and I'm repulsed that I was ever dressed that way. But I didn't know any better. Like, I really had been an attention seeker my whole life. I had no idea that it was from the devil pulling me away from God. And this whole time, the devil was literally trying to kill me, take me out. And it's because of my purpose now. The purpose I have today and the things I'm doing today, that is why he was trying so hard to take me out. And now when I see people who are, I'm getting ahead of myself just a little bit, but now when I see people who are going through any darkness that the devil has put them in, I see straight through to what's causing the darkness. I don't see anything else. All I see is that they can be delivered of it. So we're going back up to the church because there's still a few more holes to fill, but y'all hang with us. Like, I'm really hoping that whoever's listening to this is getting something from it, because I know that there's a lot of people I can still help, even by my testimony. So back at the church.
So for me, I'm a tangible person. I've got to touch things, feel them, see them. And I do believe God knows that. Everything that you've been through and what He's done through that, I've literally been right there, you know. And when we went back to the church, we walked in, and it was tense. And, you know, they used to have that prayer box sitting up there with a bunch of names in it. Would have to go, you know, you didn't have to, but you could go around, pull a name, and it was time, and you're like, go get a name. So I go up, reach my hand in this box full of a bunch of names, pull it out, and it was the lady that stole her dog. And I walked back and I sat down.
I saw your face. I'm like, no way.
Yeah, no way. And then the next Sunday,
I prayed for her too. I knew that she was sorry, and it was holding her back from also what God needed her to do. But I read the Bible and I was so hungry for the word, I was devouring it. And one day, God had me write down lessons. I would just start getting these sermons and I would start getting, you know, all kinds of things in my head. And I had this journal and I would write down the verses that I wanted to remember, or verses that pertained to something that I had read before and where to find it. So I didn't really know why I was writing down the verses, but I knew there was a reason. And one day, out of nowhere, I woke up and I decided to purge, like I had talked about, where I was getting rid of everything. I wasn't dressing provocatively anymore. And I remember putting things in that garbage bag and I made a video on it. And at this point, you know, I had been on social media. I had been on TikTok, just silly, funny videos I did on TikTok. A lot of times they were things like self-confidence challenges and stuff. But I had a small following. It was like under 10,000. I remember getting on there, and the first video I had posted was me. It's like a meme that says, once you start, there's no going back. And I started throwing the stuff away in the garbage bag to that. And it was all my books. And there was stuff like I would have never thought before reading the Bible was a problem. But as I read the Bible, God showed me, and it was a clear, that's not okay anymore. Like, I'm calling you to be holy, and that's not okay anymore. And so I would just, without question, if this is causing me a distance between God, no. And I would toss it. And so I was throwing away my books and throwing away my clothes, and I did the video and I posted it. And one of my best friends back home at the time messaged me, and she told me that I better be careful, that I was getting into deep waters that I knew nothing about, that if I did believe in God, I didn't have to give up anything for Him. And I just remember reading that and thinking, she got so angry so quick about it. She's like, I can't believe you made that video. Just very upset. And I was like, whoa. And I'm like, what was that? You know? And I'm like, I'm sorry you didn't like the little TikTok, but I'm going through something and I'm getting closer to God. And He is guiding me to purge, to cleanse. And we ended up getting in the biggest fight, and she blocked me. But that moment, I'm like, why is she so angry? Why is she so mad at me getting rid of stuff? Like, that makes no sense. Why are you mad at me for getting rid of stuff myself? How's it affecting you?
The whole time frame was just like a switch flip, though. You started reading your Bible. I remember very vividly. You started reading it, and then you just started reading it every day, and I'd be doing whatever over here. And then you're like, I'm throwing all these books away. I'm like, you love your books. You're like, throwing them away. Then you start going through the closet, and you're throwing clothes out. Yep. I'm like, whatever you want to do, But it was just, it was very abrupt.
It was very abrupt.
Like, it didn't happen slowly.
Mm-mm. God called me, and I answered fast.
It's like we got out of all that sickness mess. We got out of the rough part of the sickness where we literally thought we were going to lose you, and it was like a slingshot. Now everything wasn't over, right? Yeah. The battle wasn't over, and like had to give up a lot of things, and it was just a wild time.
It was. And I was guided to, like, as just as heavily as I was guided to purge and get rid of things that were not good in my life, I was also guided to teach other people. And after that video, I knew, I'm like, I'm supposed to do something with this. The first Bible video I ever did was here in this room, in this podcast room. That's what it is now, but it was in this room. And I sat down, and God guided my words. Even though I still was not very strong in my faith, I was learning. But I had read most of the Bible, and I was still learning theology. I was still trying to learn. I was hungry for the word. I wanted to learn more. But at this point, God said, it's time for you to teach other people what you've learned. And I sat down, and I was so nervous, and I still was kind of in a lukewarm phase where I remember having this blouse on that did show a little cleavage, and it would be deemed very acceptable for society right now. It was very cute. It would have been, but it was provocative. It was causing people to stumble. But I was still learning. I was still in my process of purging, and I did the video, and I said, I'm going to do something a little different, and I'm going to start bringing Bible lessons here. And I said, I'm in the process of changing my whole life. And God is guiding me, and I think He's guiding me to teach. And I said, so, if you want to learn, I'll be here every day. And so I started teaching. And every day.
Been there every day since.
Every day. I have been there every day since. God has me very, very disciplined. I don't cut corners with the Lord's work. And I knew in those moments this would be my new life, and that I would spend it honoring Him. And so I started teaching. I was also teaching myself. Sometimes the Holy Spirit would take over in some of my videos, and I wouldn't understand what that meant. I didn't have anyone teaching me. It was just Jesus showing me the way. And so when I would have those overpowering moments, I would watch the video back, and I would teach myself in my own video. And I'm like, how does that work? But it was so powerful of what God was doing through me at an early stage of me still learning and still developing. And so then I continued my sanctification. I continued the course. People started actually watching it. They wanted to learn more too. They saw something in me that was different. Even though I was months into my journey of learning and starting to teach other people, I was still sick. And I was still chasing doctors. Even though I was working for the Lord at this point, I knew Him. I had that personal relationship, and it was so different than anything I ever thought. But I was still sick, and I was chasing these doctors still. Even though I was saved, like God saved me, He sent a wonderful doctor to save me. And it took so many years to be diagnosed with one thing. They couldn't find the problem forever. And now all of a sudden, after that surgery, all the doctors found everything. There was just so many diagnoses, and I'm just going to name a few because anybody who's listening needs to hear this, because these are very normalized diagnoses from the doctors right now. These are things that weren't there centuries ago. And even when our grandparents was growing up, they didn't hear of half the diseases we have now. But I was diagnosed with SLE lupus, rheumatoid arthritis. I had 5 vascular compressions like the one that almost killed me. I had 5 of them. One of them was above my kidney, and it was causing my kidney to fail.
Nutcracker.
Nutcracker syndrome, NCS. And then I had May-Thurner, pelvic congestive syndrome. Gastroparesis was still there. Ehlers-Danlos syndrome, which is a connective tissue disorder. POTS, where you just faint.
After they kind of did all that, it got to a point where it was like this one person was wanting to like maybe take a kidney out or do a kidney auto transplant, and like it was getting crazy.
No, I was on the
what
list.
They were wanting to do.
It was
like these insane surgeries.
Yep. And it was crazy because when we would go to the doctors, they would be so uber focused on our case all of a sudden, and it wasn't to save me. And we knew it. Like, we would have moments where I would feel like God would show me he's not going to really help you. And I knew better. And so I'll remember 3 off the top of my head right now, because all 3 of them were such severe surgeries, and each one of them tried to persuade me to do it.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, they were really trying to get me to do it, and they either would have killed me or they would have made my body a whole lot worse. One of them was wanting to do the auto transplant out in Utah.
Yeah.
The other one was in Texas. He was wanting to do a stent. The other one wanted to do, I think it was called Ladd's procedure in Ohio, where they pretty much rotate all your intestines. And then we had the other one too. There was 4. The other main surgeon was in Connecticut, and he wanted to cut open he wanted to do mouth surgery because he thought that was the problem. So all of these doctors were telling me major surgeries, and they were like almost guaranteeing it would fix me. And I'm like, how do you have 4 different organs and 4 different parts of your body that you're wanting to work on, and all of you are telling me that you're going to fix it? So it was so rapid at how fast that increased of people wanting to help me, and then me kind of seeing something was wrong.
It felt like we just got out of the mud.
Yeah.
Then you started reading your Bible and things progressed, and then it's like we hit a slope. It's like it was trying to pull us back.
I just realized this big picture, math ain't mathin'. How are y'all going to all do different surgeries? And Frankenstein me is not going to work. And so I took it to God. And when I took it to God, it was more than just a silent plea. I learned how to actually pray. And I started praying out loud, fiercely. I started praying over our kids more. I bought you a Bible, and I calmly said, which I just want to paraphrase this and say that if you have an unbelieving part of your family, if you have a family member, especially a husband or a wife, and they're not a believer yet, the best thing you can do is show them by your actions that God is real. That is I would quietly sit with my Bible every night and I would read it. And he saw the change so dramatically in my life as I purged and as I got rid of things. And he just thought, wow, she's like, something's really going on here.
It wasn't that I was an unbeliever.
No.
I believed.
No, you did.
But what you asked me was, have you seeked God lately? That's what you asked me. Have you seeked God lately? You said, do you believe in Jesus? I'm like, yeah. Obviously. Yes, I do.
Yes, but
have you seeked him lately? And it's like, I pondered that one for just a few seconds. I'm like, nope, I've not. But that's when you got my Bible and I started reading.
I told you that I would be reading every night for the rest of my life. And I said, if you want to be on this journey with me, here's your Bible. But if you don't, that's okay too.
So I started reading, and I've been reading every night as well.
Every day.
Yeah, God knew. He knows that I'm a tangible person, and it goes on through your whole story. Like, I have to see things.
Yeah.
And that's the way that he knew that's what I needed. He has shown me so much through my wife, that I tell people all the time, I've seen too much. Faith has increased so much through what God has allowed me to see and bear witness to.
You're a little bit of a doubting Thomas.
Not doubting Thomas, just, I'm like, are you sure? Because we need to look at the facts. I'm a facts kind of guy,
Yes. Let's get to where we start baptizing people. God had been accelerating the following of my social media platforms. It was just all of a sudden, as I was consistent and as I didn't miss a day and I taught every day, I would have people come back and they would say, I'm reading the Bible now because of you. And that would just fuel me. I'm like, yeah, let's go. Let's take back our lives from the devil. And even though I would have moments of sickness myself, he was pulling me out of that pit. Like, I felt it with all of my being that those doctors that said those things, I felt like I knew it wasn't right. And so I was turning to God now. I didn't want anything else from them. And if you'll remember, just as much as I purged my clothes, I purged my doctors.
Oh, yeah.
There are some people who have to have their doctors. Doctors are a gift from God. I know they are. Luke was a doctor in the Bible. There's a place for doctors. We would be in terrible shape without them. Doctors are good. Doctors are important. I'm not saying
Most of them are good. Some of them are important.
He's traumatized by the doctors, and I understand.
I mean, obviously, you got to have doctors for certain things, but
we had seen so many, and so many told me they couldn't help me, that it scarred a lot of things. And I had medical PTSD terribly.
Fluorescent lights, the smell.
Yep.
It was unbelievable.
It really was. I couldn't even take our kids to the doctor without having a panic attack, because I was just, oof. I had so many needles, so many things in my life, and I'm like, I don't ever want to go back there. And so I turned completely to God with it. And I said, I'm not going back. Just like I didn't go back to the books. I didn't go back to the provocative clothing. And I didn't go back to any of that. So why would I go back to the doctor if God healed me? I feel bad that we've barely talked about you, but this has been your life. Your life has been...
The good thing is I live here, so we can do another one.
True. I know that a lot of that's heavy. My testimony is not light. There has been so much that I have been through and so much more to tell you, but we have reached the climax point. And I hate to leave you hanging at it, but this was so long and I have to do a second part. So I hope that you will join us next week to wrap up all of our testimony, to show you how revival got started, how Meet Me in the Water revival got to be what it is today, and to learn more about the people in the water. I was so nervous to share my testimony or to be this vulnerable, but as I'm sitting here talking with my husband, I just can't help but to think there's somebody out here listening to this that needs it. So thank you for listening so far, and I hope you'll join us next week for part 2.